My name is Evelyn Marlowe, and I am 84 years old. My bones are fragile. My voice is not as strong as it once was, but my memories remain sharper than I sometimes wish they were. People at the nursing home where I now live think old women like me only talk about weather, food, or the medicines we take. But no, before I leave this world, I want to tell you the truth about the life I lived. The truth my children never fully knew. I carry a story inside me that has burned for decades, one that I once thought I would take to my grave. But silence is dangerous. Silence destroys. And it almost destroyed me. When I was just 8 years old, I learned what silence really meant. The memory always comes back the same way, like a black and white film playing in my head. I see myself in that little wooden house we lived in, on the edge of a small American town. The year was 1949. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. My father, Charles, worked at the steel factory, and my mother, Marlene, was the type of woman who kept a tidy house but never let warmth slip from her lips. The night it happened, the kitchen smelled of fried chicken and cornbread. The table was set neatly, as always, 3 plates, one for each of us. A little oil lamp flickered in the corner, shadows bending against the walls. I can still hear the creak of the wooden chairs and the sound of my mother's fork scraping against her plate. I was standing by the doorway when my father called my name. "Evelyn," he said in a low, heavy voice. I knew that tone. I had heard it before, thick with anger, thick with something darker. My body froze, but my feet were pulled toward him as if they belonged to someone else. "Come here," he ordered. When I walked closer, he grabbed me by the arm. His grip was iron, the kind of grip that makes a child feel like glass about to crack. I looked at my mother for help. She sat there, eating, chewing slowly, her eyes fixed on her plate. Not once did she look up. And then it began. I will not describe every detail of what he did that night, because some horrors should not be painted with words, especially for young ears. But I will tell you this. It went on for hours. He hurt me, and with every sound I made, every whimper, every cry, I turned my eyes toward my mother. She never moved. She never dropped her fork. She never told him to stop. The only sounds were my sobs and her chewing. The sound of chewing has haunted me all my life. At one point, I screamed her name. "Mama, Mama, please." She raised her eyes for just a moment, cold and empty, before looking back at her food. She never said a word. She didn't run to me. She didn't stop him. She just kept eating. I thought mothers were supposed to be shields, protectors. But mine was stone. By the time it ended, I was lying on the floor, my small body trembling. My father lit a cigarette, his shadow stretching across the wall. He looked satisfied, like a man who had eaten his fill. He walked away without a glance, leaving me broken and gasping. And my mother, she stood up, carried her empty plate to the sink, and began washing it as if nothing had happened. I dragged myself to her, clinging to her skirt with my tiny hands. "Mama, why didn't you help me?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. She pulled her skirt away from me as though I were dirt. And then she said the words that carved themselves into my soul. "Be quiet, Evelyn. You don't want people to know what happens in this house." That was the first time I realized I was alone in the world. For weeks after that night, I stopped speaking. I went to school, I played with no one, I sat in the back of the classroom staring at the chalkboard. My teacher, Mrs. Fields, asked me once, "Evelyn, is something wrong at home?" I shook my head, because my mother's words were louder than my own voice. Be quiet. Every night I prayed, not for God to stop my father, but for my mother to see me, to love me, to hold me. She never did. She moved through life as though she had no daughter. The silence became heavier as I grew. My father's temper rose and fell like a storm, unpredictable and violent. But it was my mother's silence that killed me slowly. One night, months after that terrible evening, I sat under the kitchen table while my parents argued. My father's voice boomed like thunder. "She's weak," he spat, pointing toward me. "That girl will never be worth anything." My mother's response was quiet but sharp. "Then marry her off early." Make her someone else's problem. I felt the blood drain from my face. I was only 10 years old. That was the night I understood that my future wasn't mine. They were already planning to hand me over like a piece of property. I crawled into bed, hugging my pillow, whispering to myself, "One day, Evelyn. One day, you will leave this house." But how does a little girl escape chains she cannot see? Looking back now from the quiet of this nursing home bed, I realized something important. The physical pain fades with time, but the silence never leaves you. It echoes inside your chest. It grows into shame. It teaches you to hide your tears. That's why I'm telling you this story now. Because maybe there's someone listening who knows that same silence. And maybe, just maybe, hearing me will remind them that they are not alone. I can still see that dinner table. The fried chicken bones, the cornbread crumbs, the fork tapping against the plate. My father's shadow towering. My mother's eyes fixed on her food. And me, a little girl, learning that the people who are supposed to protect you can betray you in the cruelest way, by doing nothing at all. That night didn't just scar me. It carved the path of my life. And it was only the beginning. If you think that was the worst of it, you are wrong. What came next stole the rest of my childhood and nearly crushed my spirit forever. Stay with me, because the silence in my home was about to grow louder and far more dangerous. Though I am now 84, the shadows of my childhood never left me. They follow me like ghosts, sometimes quiet, sometimes loud, but always there when the lights go out. After that night at the dinner table, the night my father broke me and my mother stayed silent, life did not return to normal. It couldn't. Once you know the truth about the people who raised you, you cannot pretend anymore. But in my house, pretending was the law. The very next morning, I woke to the sound of my mother's footsteps in the kitchen. She was humming, as though the night before had never happened. She cooked eggs, placed bread on the table, and reminded me that I had school. I wanted to scream at her, to shout, "Why? Why didn't you stop him?" But the words stuck like thorns in my throat. Her cold eyes warned me to stay quiet. So I obeyed. At school, the chalk squeaked against the blackboard, and children's laughter filled the air. But my world was silent. I didn't talk. I didn't smile. I sat at the back of the classroom like a ghost. My classmates avoided me. Maybe they sensed the darkness around me. Maybe I smelled of fear. Mrs. Fields. There was only one person who noticed, Mrs. Clara Fields, my teacher. She was young, with kind eyes and a soft voice. She used to crouch beside my desk, her perfume faint like roses, and whisper, "Evelyn, are you all right?" I always shook my head no. Not because I was fine, but because no meant don't ask. She didn't push me, but sometimes she'd slip an extra piece of cornbread into my lunchbox or place her hand gently on my shoulder. It was the closest thing to comfort I had. We lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone. Whispers carried faster than the wind. People noticed my father's temper, my mother's stone face, and my silence. Neighbors would glance at me, then turn away. One Sunday after church, I overheard two women whispering near the pews. "That girl never smiles," one said. "Something's wrong in that house," the other replied. But like my mother, they did nothing. Adults saw, adults whispered, adults judged, but no one saved me. To survive, I created hiding spots. Behind the old barn, inside the hollow of an oak tree, and under my bed with a flashlight and a book borrowed from Mrs. Fields. Those places became my real home. When my father raged, I ran. When my mother ignored me, I hid. I read stories about brave girls and imagined I was one of them. Stories were the only voices louder than my silence. But every evening, when supper came, the silence was louder than any storm. My father chewed with his mouth open, slamming his fork against the plate. My mother sat straight, chewing calmly, never meeting my eyes. I would sit there, shrinking in my chair, wondering, does she see me? Does she hear me crying at night? Does she care? The answer never came. When I was 10, I stumbled upon something that froze my blood. It was late. I had crept downstairs to drink water. My parents didn't see me. They were in the kitchen, voices low but sharp. I hid behind the wall, listening. "She's becoming a problem," my father said. "She's weak," my mother replied. "Always moping, always silent. People are beginning to talk." "Then we'll marry her off early," my father growled. "I know a man who owes me money. He'll take her. That way, she won't shame us anymore." My knees buckled. My hand shook so badly the glass slipped and shattered on the floor. They both turned. My father's glare was like fire. My mother's lips tightened into a thin line. "What are you doing up?" he barked. "And nothing," I stammered. "Go to bed," my mother said coldly. Her tone carried no affection, no concern, only annoyance that I had overheard. I ran upstairs, heart pounding. That night, under my blanket, I wept silently. It was the second time I realized the truth. Not only would my mother never save me, she was planning to give me away. The next day at school, I was pale and weak. Mrs. Fields knelt beside me and whispered, "Evelyn, you look tired. Did something happen at home?" For a moment, I almost told her. My lips parted, words fighting to come out. But then my mother's voice echoed in my head. "Be quiet. Don't let people know what happens in this house." So I swallowed my truth. Mrs. Fields sighed and handed me an apple. "If you ever want to talk, I'll listen." Those words stayed with me. She was the first adult who had ever offered me safety. But I was too young, too scared, too silenced to take it. The years between 10 and 13 blurred together. I did my chores, went to school, hid in my secret places, and endured the quiet cruelty of my home. My father's punishments never stopped, but it was my mother's empty gaze that left the deepest wounds. Sometimes I wondered if she had once been like me, a girl with dreams. Maybe silence had been forced upon her too. But those were only questions. She never told me her story. She never told me anything at all. On my 13th birthday, there was no cake, no gift, not even a happy birthday. Only silence. That night, I sat under the oak tree and whispered to myself, "You don't belong here, Evelyn. One day you'll leave. One day you'll be free." But freedom was not mine to choose. My parents had already decided my fate. I was 14 when I overheard the final blow. They were in the parlor, voices hushed but urgent. I crouched in the hallway, my heart racing. The man agreed. My father said, "He'll take her when she turns 15. It'll settle the debt." My mother answered, her tone as calm as if she were discussing a recipe. My chest tightened. My throat closed. 15. I wasn't even finished being a child, and they had already sold my future. That night, I clutched my pillow and cried until I fell asleep. I dreamed of running away, of escaping to Mrs. Fields, of hiding forever in the oak tree. But dreams are fragile things. When I woke, I knew the truth. My life was no longer mine. From that moment on, every day was filled with dread. My father's footsteps sounded like chains. My mother's silence became unbearable. Every meal, every chore, every night in my bed felt like the countdown to execution. At school, I began drawing maps in my notebook, secret escape plans that led nowhere. I watched trains pass the edge of town and wondered if I could ever hop on one. But I was still a child. And children, in those days, were powerless. One evening, when I was 14, I found the courage to ask my mother quietly in the kitchen, "Why, Mama? Why do you hate me?" For the first time, she looked at me, really looked at me. Her eyes were sharp but wet, as if tears were hiding beneath the surface. "I don't hate you," she whispered. "This is just the way things are." Then she turned away and kept stirring the pot on the stove. Her words echoed in me. The way things are. Was this truly my fate? To be beaten, silenced, and sold like a burden? I sit here now, decades later, and I still remember that night. My mother's hands stirring, her back turned to me, her voice empty of love. It was the closest thing to comfort she ever gave me, and it was no comfort at all. Not long after, the man they had chosen for me came to dinner. He was twice my father's age, with greasy hair and yellow teeth. He shook my hand with a grip too tight, and my father beamed with pride. "This will be your husband one day," he said. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But my mother sat silently, chewing her food. That was the night I realized my childhood was over. At 15, I would become a wife against my will. And what waited for me in that marriage was darker than I ever imagined. Stay with me because the cage was about to close. I was barely 16 when my father told me, without looking me in the eyes, that I was to be married. His words were like iron bars closing around me. I had seen the way he handled cattle on the farm, sold without a second thought when they no longer served a purpose. That day, I realized he thought of me no differently. My mother sat beside him at the table, chewing her bread slowly, the way she always did, never speaking, never intervening. Her silence cut deeper than his words. I wanted her to stand up for me, to shout, to tell him I was still a child. Instead, she dropped her gaze to her plate, as if she hadn't even heard. The man chosen for me was Arthur. He was nearly twice my age, a local farmer with rough hands and a reputation for cruelty. I had seen him in town, laughing too loudly, grabbing barmaids by the waist without their consent. Whenever he caught my eye, there was a hunger in his stare that made my stomach twist. I begged my father, "Please, I can work harder. I can help you with the fields, with the livestock. I don't want to be married." He struck me across the face before I could finish. "You're not here to want anything. You are here to obey." That night, I cried into my pillow, my body trembling with the weight of my future. I imagined myself running away, but I had nowhere to go. Every road led back to the same prison, my family, my community, the expectations of everyone around me. The wedding day arrived with the sun burning cruelly overhead. I wore a white dress my mother had sewn, but it felt more like a shroud than a celebration. As I stood at the altar beside Arthur, his grip on my hand was so tight that my fingers went numb. The town clapped and smiled. To them, this was proper, respectable. A young girl given to a man who could provide. But they didn't see the way his nails dug into my skin, the way his eyes devoured me, as if I were a piece of meat. When the vows were spoken and the ring slid onto my finger, I felt the final door slammed shut inside my chest. Evelyn, the girl who once dreamed of reading books, of painting by the river, was buried that day beneath layers of duty and fear. Marriage was no refuge. It was simply another cage, this one smaller, tighter, with bars I could never escape. Arthur expected obedience in everything. If his food wasn't hot enough, he shouted. If the house wasn't spotless, he threw objects against the walls. His anger filled every room like smoke, choking me, leaving me gasping for air. At night, when he crawled into bed beside me, I clenched my jaw and willed myself somewhere else. The ceiling above became my only witness, absorbing my silent cries as his rough hands claimed me. I was still a child inside, but he never saw that. To him, I was property. The first time I realized I was pregnant, I sat on the wooden floor of our small home, clutching my stomach with trembling hands. A mixture of terror and fragile hope filled me. Perhaps motherhood would give me something of my own, something no one could take away. But pregnancy brought no gentleness from Arthur. If anything, it made him more cruel. He barked orders for me to fetch water, chopped wood, cleaned, all while my body ached and swelled. "You're not sick," he sneered once when I asked to rest. "You're carrying my child. That's what a wife is supposed to do." Each word carved into me. I began to shrink into myself, hiding the little pieces of who I was, protecting them like fragile treasures no one could see. I gave birth in the middle of a stormy night. The wind howled outside as my screams echoed through the wooden walls. Arthur stood by, pacing, as if waiting for a cow to deliver a calf. There was no tenderness, no fear for my pain, only impatience. When the baby finally arrived, a little boy with lungs strong enough to pierce the storm, I held him to my chest and cried. For the first time in years, my tears were not only of sorrow. This tiny life was mine. My son. My reason to fight. Arthur looked at him with pride, puffing his chest like he had done something great. But when the baby cried too long, or when I spent too much time rocking him instead of cleaning, Arthur grew restless, snapping at me. I learned quickly to shield my son from his father's temper, whispering promises to him in the dark. I'll protect you. I won't let him break you the way he broke me. In secret, I began hiding coins. Just a few cents at a time from the grocery money Arthur gave me. I tucked them into the lining of an old shoe, far in the back of the closet. It wasn't much, but in my heart, it was the beginning of freedom. Sometimes, when Arthur stormed out after a drunken rage, I would sit in the quiet and imagine a different life. A small house far from here, where my son could run in the grass without fear. Where laughter wasn't punished, where love wasn't chained. The dream was fragile, but it was mine. One evening, Arthur stumbled in from the tavern, reeking of beer. His boots clomped against the wooden floor, heavy and angry. I tried to keep my voice soft as I handed him dinner, but he pushed the plate away, spilling stew across the table. You think you can starve me? You think I don't see what you're doing? His voice slurred but sharp. I made it fresh, I whispered, but my hand shook. He grabbed me by the wrist, pulling me close. Don't you lie to me. Don't you ever lie to me. In his other hand, he held something gleaming. For a moment, I didn't understand. Then my stomach dropped. It was a gun. The cold metal pressed against my ribs, the smell of gun oil mixing with the stench of alcohol. My knees buckled beneath me. You belong to me, Arthur hissed, his eyes wild. You'll never leave me alive. If you ever try, I'll put you in the ground myself. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, my son's cries echoing from the next room. The sound of his tiny wails ripped through me. I wanted to run, to scream, to fight, but the barrel of the gun kept me locked in place. And in that moment, staring into Arthur's bloodshot eyes, I realized my life was hanging by a single thread. If this chapter shook your heart, stay with me. My fight was only beginning, and the cage I lived in was about to shatter. Don't miss the next chapter, where I risk everything for freedom. Subscribe and keep walking with me through this story. The night after Arthur pressed the gun into my ribs, I sat awake long after he stumbled into bed. My body trembled with every breath, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. His words replayed like a curse. You'll never leave me alive. But what he didn't know was that I had already decided. Staying meant death. Running meant danger. Either way, I risked everything, but if I ran, at least I might give my son a chance at life. The coins hidden in my shoe had grown to a small pile. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. I whispered to my baby as he nursed at my chest. We're leaving, little one. Mama won't let him hurt you. I waited 3 more days. 3 days of silence, of pretending, of cooking Arthur's meals and scrubbing his boots as though nothing had changed. Each task was a performance, my mask of obedience hiding the storm inside me. Finally, one afternoon, Arthur left for the tavern, swaying on his feet, muttering about beer. I watched from the window until his shadow disappeared down the dirt road. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I moved quickly. I took the old shoe from the closet, ripped open the lining, and scooped the coins into a cloth. I packed only what I could carry: diapers, a blanket, a few pieces of bread. My baby boy clung to me, his soft breath warm against my neck. When I stepped outside, the air was thick with summer heat. The sky stretched wide above me, endless and uncaring. Every step toward the road felt like stepping into fire. My legs shook, but I kept moving. For the first time, the cage door was open. I walked for miles, my shoes rubbing blisters into my feet. By nightfall, my arms ached from holding my son, but I dared not stop. Each rustle in the trees made me jump. Every crunch of gravel behind me made me fear Arthur's boots pounding after us. We reached a bus station in the next town by dawn. The smell of diesel and fried food filled the air. I counted my coins with shaking fingers. It was barely enough for 2 tickets, but the driver looked at me, sweaty, desperate, clutching a baby, and nodded. He led us on without a word. As the bus rumbled away, I pressed my forehead against the glass and watched the fields blur past. For the first time in years, I felt air fill my lungs without choking me. I whispered to my son, "We're free. We're really free. But freedom came with a price. I found work cleaning houses in a small town 3 hours away. The pay was low, but it was honest. I scrubbed floors until my knees were raw, washed dishes until my fingers cracked. Each night, I collapsed onto the thin mattress of the small room we rented, my baby curled against me. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror, hair tangled, face gaunt, and barely recognized myself. But in my son's eyes, I saw hope. He giggled when I sang to him, his tiny hands grabbing my hair. That sound alone gave me strength. Yet fear followed me like a shadow. Every knock at the door made my stomach drop. Every unfamiliar face in town made me wonder if Arthur had found us. I knew his temper. I knew he would never let me go easily. Months passed, and I built a fragile routine. I befriended a woman named Marjorie, an older widow who lived next door. She saw my struggles and sometimes offered bread or milk when I had none. One evening, as I hung laundry, Marjorie leaned over the fence. "Heard you came from out near the river farms," she said softly. I froze, my hands clutching a damp sheet. "Yes," I admitted. She gave me a long look, then nodded. "Don't worry, honey. We all have pasts we'd rather leave behind." She reached out, touching my arm. "You're safe here." Those words nearly broke me. Safe. Could it be true? But safety is fragile when built on secrets. One night, after a long day of cleaning, I returned home to find the door of my room slightly open. My heart pounded as I pushed it wider. Inside, everything was still. My son slept in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling. But on the floor, near the bed, was a boot print. Muddy. Fresh. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't mine. That night, I barely slept, clutching my son to my chest, listening to every creak of the old building. Days later, the nightmare returned. I was walking home from work, the sun low in the sky, when I saw him. Arthur, leaning against the lamppost across the street, his hat low, a smirk twisting his lips. My blood turned to ice. "There you are, Evelyn," he called, his voice smooth mocking. "Did you think you could hide forever?" I grabbed my son tighter and ran, my feet pounding the dirt road. Behind me, I heard his boots striking the ground, his laughter chasing me like a wolf on the hunt. My lungs burned, tears blurred my vision, but I kept running. I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when freedom was within my grasp. I ducked into an alley, pressing my back against the wall, clutching my son so tightly he whimpered. Arthur's shadow stretched at the mouth of the alley, his voice drifting in, low and dangerous. "You can't hide from me, Evelyn. You're mine. You'll always be mine." The sound of his footsteps grew closer, echoing off the walls. My heart thundered in my ears. And as his shadow darkened the entrance, I realized this fight was only beginning. If your heart raced with mine, don't stop now. In the next chapter, I'll show you what happened when I tried to rebuild my life, but the past never truly lets go. Stay with me, subscribe, and share this story so no one has to suffer in silence. The night I saw Arthur's shadow at the alley's mouth, I thought my world was ending. But by some miracle, he didn't find me. A group of men leaving the tavern passed by, loud and stumbling, and Arthur turned away, muttering. I stayed hidden until my legs went numb, my son pressed to my chest, my tears soaking his tiny cap. That night taught me something important. Survival was possible, but safety was a fragile illusion. If I wanted a real chance, I had to keep moving forward. I worked harder than I thought the human body could endure. I scrubbed houses until my hands cracked and bled. I took on laundry, babysitting, even mending clothes late into the night by candlelight. I told myself every ache, every blister, every sleepless night was worth it because it meant food for my child and a roof over our heads. We lived in a small, one-room apartment above a bakery. The walls were thin, the floor creaked, and the air always smelled of yeast and sugar. But to me, it was a castle. It was a place Arthur couldn't touch. When my son, Samuel, learned to walk, he toddled across the wooden floor, his giggles bouncing off the walls like music. His laughter was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I promised myself he would never know the cage I had lived in. But life is rarely kind for long. Bills stacked up faster than I could pay them. Some days, I skipped meals so Samuel could eat. On cold nights, I wrapped him in every blanket we had and shivered beside him, my stomach empty, whispering prayers into the darkness. Marjorie, the widow who had befriended me, often slipped bread into my basket. "You're doing your best, Evelyn," she told me one evening. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her kindness kept me afloat when I felt like drowning. Years passed, and Samuel grew. He was bright, too bright maybe. He asked questions I couldn't answer. Why don't I have a father like the other kids? Why do you work so much? I tried to give him simple answers, but the truth weighed on me. I couldn't tell him about Arthur yet. I couldn't put that darkness into his innocent eyes. When he was 8, I had another child, a daughter, Clara. Her father was a kind man I had met briefly, but kindness is not always steady. He drifted out of our lives before Clara turned 2, leaving me with another mouth to feed, another fragile soul to protect. Raising 2 children alone was harder than I ever imagined. Samuel grew restless, rebellious. He hated being poor, hated the secondhand clothes and the stares from kids at school. He began to resent me. One evening, when he was 12, he slammed his fists on the table. "Why are we always struggling? Why don't you just marry someone rich like the others? You're so weak, Mom. You're just like—" He stopped, but the words hung heavy in the air. I knew what he had almost said. "You're just like him." Tears burned my eyes, but I held them back. "I am doing everything I can, Samuel. One day you'll understand." But he didn't. Not then. Clara, gentler by nature, tried to soothe the storms between us. She would crawl into my lap after Samuel's outbursts and whisper, "Don't listen to him, Mama. I love you." Her small arms wrapped around my neck were the only thing that reminded me I wasn't completely failing. Still, I worried. Trauma has a way of dripping down through generations like poison in a well. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much love I poured into my children, the shadows of the past seemed to stretch into their lives. When Samuel was 16, the tension finally exploded. I came home late one evening after cleaning offices downtown. My hands were raw from scrubbing, my back ached, and all I wanted was to sit for 5 minutes. But the moment I opened the door, I froze. Samuel was standing in the middle of the room, his face twisted in anger, holding the small cloth pouch where I kept our savings. "What is this?" he demanded. My heart dropped. "It's for rent. For food." "You're lying." His voice cracked, loud and sharp. "You're keeping money from us. You're selfish, just like—" He stopped again, but this time he didn't swallow it. He spat the words like venom. Just like him. The world seemed to tilt under my feet. "Samuel, please." He threw the pouch to the floor. Coins scattered across the wooden planks, clinking like shattered glass. "I hate you," he shouted. "You ruined my life. You're nothing but weak." For a moment, I saw Arthur in him, his stance, his glare, the way his words cut. My knees buckled, and I sank into the chair, clutching my chest as though his words had struck me like a blow. Clara screamed at him, tears streaming down her face. "Don't talk to Mama like that. She gave up everything for us." But Samuel didn't stop. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I sat there in silence, the scattered coins glinting on the floor, my daughter sobbing beside me. For the first time since I had escaped Arthur, I felt the cage closing in again, not from outside, but from within my own family. If this chapter broke your heart, stay close. In the next chapter, the pain spreads across generations, and the weight of my past threatens to destroy my children too. Don't miss it. Subscribe, share, and let's walk through this storm together. Time is a strange thing. It moves slowly when you are in pain, but when you look back, the years are gone in the blink of an eye. One moment I was clutching Samuel and Clara in my arms, promising them safety. The next, they were grown, taller than me, with lives of their own, shaped by wounds I had tried so hard to keep from them. By the time I reached my late 40s, my body bore the marks of all the years of struggle. My back was bent from scrubbing floors, my hands rough with scars from endless work. But the deeper scars were not visible. They lived in my children's eyes, in their words, in the silence that sometimes grew between us like a wall. Samuel left home at 18 with anger still burning in his chest. He rarely called. When he did, his voice was sharp, full of blame. "You never gave me a real family," he told me once over the phone. "You never gave me a father. Do you know what that did to me?" I sat on the edge of my bed, the receiver heavy in my hand, my heart breaking with every word. "Samuel, I did the best I could. I kept us alive. I kept you safe." "Safe," he spat. "You call this safe?" "I had nothing, Mom. Nothing." The line went dead before I could answer. I sat there in silence, staring at the wall, feeling like I had failed him in ways I couldn't even understand. Clara, though softer at heart, carried her own quiet resentment. She married young, eager to escape the weight of our small apartment. She built a family, but even with her husband and children, I saw the distance in her eyes when she looked at me. One afternoon, she visited with her daughter, and as I poured tea, she blurted, "You never protected us, Mama. You tried, but you didn't. We still suffered." Her words sliced me open. "Clara," I whispered, "I did everything I knew how." She sighed, her shoulders sagging. "I know, but it wasn't enough." I spent years walking on a tightrope between my children's love and their resentment. I gave what I could, but it always seemed too little, too late. I found work in a diner after leaving housekeeping. Long hours on my feet, serving coffee to truckers and farmers, smiling even when my body screamed for rest. Sometimes Samuel came through town and ignored me completely, pretending not to notice me behind the counter. That cut deeper than any insult. Clara would visit occasionally, bringing her children. She was kinder, but her visits felt like obligations. I wondered if she came more for her children's sake, so they would know their grandmother, than out of any real desire to see me. One winter, when the snow piled thick against the windows, I collapsed at work. My body gave out after years of pushing it too hard. I woke up in the hospital, machines beeping, the sterile smell of disinfectant filling my nose. Clara was there, her face pale, worry etched across her forehead. Samuel arrived later, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You can't live like this anymore, Mama," Clara said softly. "You need rest. You need care." "I can manage," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I've always managed." But Samuel scoffed. "Managed? You're falling apart. You've been falling apart our whole lives." His words hit me harder than any slap. I turned my face toward the window, tears sliding down my cheeks. Outside, snowflakes drifted gently, beautiful and cold. That night, I overheard them in the hallway, their voices sharp through the thin hospital door. "She can't keep living alone like this," Clara argued. "She needs help." Samuel's voice was harsh. "She needs a nursing home. She's too weak. She's been weak her whole life." I clutched the blanket to my chest, the words stabbing into me. After everything I had survived, after everything I had sacrificed, this was what my children thought of me? That I was weak, that I didn't belong in their lives anymore? Lying there in that hospital bed, listening to them debate my future, I felt a cold, familiar dread crawl up my spine. It was the same feeling I had as a child, sitting at the table while my mother ate in silence, watching my father hurt me. Powerless, small, forgotten. And I knew, as the door creaked open and Samuel's shadow fell across my bed, that my battle was far from over. If this chapter touched you, stay close. In the next chapter, I'll take you inside the nursing home, the place where I thought my story would end, but where secrets and whispers began to change everything. Subscribe, share, and let my story remind us all, silence should never be the end. I was 78 years old when I decided to walk back into the house where it all began. The small ranch-style home on Willow Creek Lane, with its chipped white paint and sagging porch, still stood like a ghost from another time. My father had died decades ago. My mother was buried under a cold stone that never once mentioned love or kindness. Yet the house still breathed. I told no one where I was going that day. Not my daughter, not my grandchildren. This was something I had to face alone. For years, I had avoided the street altogether, driving the long way around town just so I wouldn't see it. But the nightmares had become unbearable. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's shadow looming over me, and behind him, my mother chewing her supper as if my cries were only background noise. When I parked in front of the old house, my hands shook so hard I could barely remove the keys from the ignition. My heart pounded against my ribs, warning me to turn back. But another voice whispered inside me, "No more running, Margaret. If you want peace, you must open the door to your past." The front gate creaked the same way it had when I was a girl. The walkway was cracked, weeds pushing through as if the earth itself wanted to reclaim the place. I reached the porch, touched the wooden rail, and felt splinters bite into my fingers. And then, as I turned the doorknob, I realized something. It was unlocked. For a moment, I froze. Who would leave this place open? No one had lived here in years, at least not legally. But curiosity overpowered fear, and I pushed the door. It groaned open, releasing a stale smell of dust, mold, and something deeper, memories. The living room looked smaller than I remembered. The faded wallpaper peeled, revealing plaster beneath. A broken rocking chair leaned in the corner. And on the dining table, unbelievably, sat an old ceramic bowl with a spoon inside. I almost laughed, until the tears came. Because that bowl was exactly where my mother had sat during those nights, eating silently while my father's cruelty filled the room. I could see her thin hands, her chewing mouth, her blank eyes that never once looked at me as her child. I whispered aloud, "Why, Mama? Why did you just sit there?" The silence answered back. I walked through each room slowly, as though retracing the map of my pain. The hallway, where I had once collapsed after hours of torment. The bedroom door where I had locked myself inside, pressing my back against it while praying he wouldn't break through. The kitchen where my mother stirred stew, without looking at me. And then I opened the closet in the master bedroom. That was where I found it. A box, tucked in the corner, covered in dust but carefully sealed with string. My hands trembled as I untied it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, addressed to my mother. The envelopes were yellowed with age, but the names leapt out at me. They weren't from strangers. They were from her sisters, her cousins, even her own mother. Each letter begged her to leave my father. They spoke of his reputation, of how people in town whispered about his violent ways. Some even mentioned me, the child everyone knew was suffering. "Protect Margaret," one letter read. "If you stay, she will not survive him." My stomach dropped. She had known. She had known all along, and chosen to stay. I sank onto the floor, clutching the letters to my chest. I felt rage boil through me, not at my father this time, but at her. The woman who should have been my shield had been my silent executioner. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, I wept until the dust rose around me and the weight of years pressed against my lungs. It was then that I heard a noise, a soft shuffle behind me. I turned quickly, wiping my eyes. A man stood in the doorway. At first, I thought he was a ghost, my father resurrected to haunt me. But no. This man was younger, maybe in his 50s. His clothes were worn, his beard scruffy. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, raising his hands. "I sometimes sleep here. No one cares about this place." I studied him, trying to calm my racing heart. "Who are you?" "Name's Daniel," he replied. "Homeless, I guess. But this house, it feels safe." He hesitated, almost like it protects me. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Protects you? This house destroyed me." He frowned. "Destroyed you how?" And before I knew it, words tumbled from my mouth. I told him everything. The nights of abuse, the silence of my mother, the years of scars that no one could see. His eyes filled with tears as he listened. When I finished, he whispered, "I'm sorry. No one should live through that." Something shifted inside me then. For the first time, I spoke my truth to a stranger in the very place where my pain had begun. And instead of judgment or silence, I received compassion. That night, I didn't leave the house. I sat with Daniel on the porch until dawn, watching the sun paint the sky pink. The house hadn't protected me, but maybe, just maybe, by returning, I had taken back some power. I knew this was only the beginning. The real confrontation, the one with my family, with my daughter and grandchildren, still lay ahead. They had to know who I really was, what I had endured, and why I sometimes trembled at the sound of footsteps in the dark. The House of Secrets had opened its mouth. Now it was my turn to speak. Friends, Margaret's courage is building, but can she face her family with the truth she has hidden for nearly 80 years? If you believe silence should never protect abuse, stay with me for the next chapter. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Margaret finally confronts the people she loves most. For most of my life, silence was my companion. Silence kept me alive, but it also kept me chained. Now, after nearly 8 decades, I was ready to speak. The morning after I returned from the old house, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the phone. My daughter, Ruthan, called me every few days, always checking in like a good daughter should. She thought she knew me, her mama who baked pies, who sewed quilts, who smiled through Sunday dinners. But she didn't know the shadows I carried. I dialed her number before I lost my courage. "Hello, Mama," she answered cheerfully, her voice warm as always. "How are you today?" I swallowed hard. "Ruth, and can you and the children come over this weekend?" I have something important to tell you." There was a pause. "Of course, Mama. Is everything all right?" "No," I whispered. "But it will be, after you hear me out." By Saturday, the house smelled of roast chicken and biscuits. I cooked not because I wanted to, but because it gave me something to do with my trembling hands. The table was set, the family pictures on the walls staring down like silent witnesses. Ruth Ann arrived first with her husband, Leonard, a gentle man with kind eyes. Then came the grandchildren, Evelina, 16, forever on her phone, and Tobias, 11, who still liked to chase the dog around the yard. They laughed and filled the house with noise, but my stomach twisted tighter with each passing minute. When the dishes were cleared, I folded my hands on the table. "Children," I began, my voice shaking, "I need you to listen to me with open hearts. What I'm about to tell you isn't easy, but it's time you know the truth about me, about where I came from." The laughter died. Ruth Ann leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Mama, what is it?" I took a deep breath, and for the first time in my life, I told them everything. I described my father's cruelty, the endless hours of abuse, the way he broke me down until I thought I wasn't human anymore. I told them how my mother sat at the table, chewing her supper, never lifting a hand to stop him, never even looking at me with love. The words poured out like floodwaters, raw and unstoppable. My voice cracked, but I did not stop. I told them how I ran away at 18, how I married young just to escape, how I never told a soul because shame stitched my lips shut. When I finished, the room was silent. Evelina's phone lay forgotten on the table. Tobias stared at me with wide, wet eyes. Leonard reached for Ruth Ann's hand. And Ruth Ann, my daughter, she wept. "Oh, Mama," she whispered, pressing a napkin to her face. "All these years you carried this alone?" "Yes," I said, "because I didn't want you to see me as weak. I wanted you to think I was strong. But the truth is, I was broken, and I've been patching myself together ever since." Evelina finally spoke, her teenage voice trembling. "Grandma, I never knew. I thought you were just perfect." A bitter smile crossed my lips. "Perfect? No, child. I'm not perfect. But I survived. And now I need you to know so that silence doesn't win again." Tobias wiped his nose with his sleeve. "Grandma, I wish I could have been there to protect you." That broke me. I gathered him into my arms, holding his little body against my frail chest. "Oh, sweetheart, just hearing you say that heals something inside me." But not everyone in the room received my truth with tenderness. Leonard cleared his throat. Margaret, he said gently, thank you for sharing. But may I ask, why now? After so long? Why not years ago? I looked at him, at all of them. Because now I'm closer to the end than the beginning. I want to leave this world free of lies. And I want my family to be free of silence. You must know that darkness can sit in a house, smiling at supper, hiding behind normalcy. I need you to break that cycle. Promise me you won't stay silent if you see someone suffering. Ruth Ann reached across the table, gripping my hands tight. I promise, Mama. I won't let silence win. Evelina and Tobias nodded through their tears. I thought that would be the end of it. But life never wraps up neatly in a bow. That night, after everyone left, Ruth Ann stayed behind. Mama, she said softly, I need to tell you something, too. My heart stopped. What is it, child? She hesitated, twisting her wedding band. When I was little, I sometimes saw the way you flinched when Daddy raised his voice. I didn't understand then, but now I think I do. And, Mama, there were times he scared me, too. My knees weakened. Leonard. No, Mama, she whispered, shaking her head quickly. Not Leonard. He's a good man. I mean Daddy, my daddy, your first husband. Before you left him. A chill ran through me. My first husband, Jacob. I had tried to bury him in my past, but the truth was, I had chosen a man not much different from my father. I had thought marriage would save me, but instead, it almost destroyed me again. Tears welled in my eyes. I'm so sorry, Ruthan. I never knew you saw. I thought I shielded you. She touched my cheek. You did your best, Mama. And now I understand why. You were fighting ghosts I couldn't see. We wept together, 2 generations scarred by silence, but finally finding words. The days that followed were heavy but healing. Evelina asked to interview me for a school project on family history, wanting to honor my story. Tobias began drawing pictures of superheroes, saying one was Grandma the Survivor. But not everyone wanted my truth to spread. One evening, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a folded piece of paper inside with a single sentence written in shaky ink. Some secrets should stay buried, Margaret. My blood ran cold. Who had sent this? My family didn't know the details yet. The only place I had revisited was the old house. Was someone watching me there? I folded the letter, my hands trembling. For the first time in weeks, fear returned, sharp and merciless. Had I awakened something dangerous by speaking? Or was this just another test of my courage? Either way, I knew one thing. Silence would not claim me again. Friends, Margaret has finally told her family the truth, but someone doesn't want those secrets revealed. Who sent the threatening letter, and what hidden danger still lingers in her past? Stay with me for the next chapter. Like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss what comes when the past fights back. The letter sat on my nightstand like a poisonous snake. Some secrets should stay buried, Margaret. I stared at those words every night, wondering who had written them. Was it a cruel prank? Or someone connected to the house, the same house that had swallowed my childhood whole? For days, I didn't sleep well. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, felt like a warning. Yet fear had done enough damage in my life. I wasn't going to let it win again. So I decided to go back one last time to the house on Willow Creek Lane. It was a gray morning when I returned. Clouds hung low, and the air smelled of rain. I carried a flashlight, a walking stick, and something stronger than both, my resolve. The front gate squealed as I pushed it open. The house loomed ahead, broken and abandoned, yet still alive with ghosts. Inside, dust swirled through the air. The old ceramic bowl still sat on the dining table. My father's chair, splintered and leaning, stood like a throne of cruelty. But this time, I wasn't the frightened little girl. I was Margaret Holloway, 78 years old, scarred but unbroken. I walked down the hallway and stopped at the master bedroom. The closet door was slightly ajar. My heart pounded. Slowly, I pushed it open. And there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was Daniel, the homeless man I'd met before. His eyes widened when he saw me. "You came back," he said softly. Yes, I replied.
My voice was steady.
And I found a letter. Did you send it? His face twisted in confusion. Letter?
No.
What letter? I studied him, searching for truth. His expression seemed honest. But if not Daniel, then who? Before I could ask further, a noise came from the front porch. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Daniel stiffened. Someone else is here. I gripped my walking stick tighter. Then let them come. The footsteps grew louder until a man appeared in the doorway. He was older, maybe in his 70s, with thinning gray hair and sharp eyes that mirrored a face I once knew. My knees buckled. Margaret, he said, his voice gravelly. I wondered when you'd come back. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The years peeled away, and I saw the monster of my childhood standing before me. But no, it wasn't him. This man was younger. Who are you? I whispered at a brother. The word struck me like lightning. My parents had never spoken of another child. I thought I was their only one. Samuel's eyes burned into mine. I left home when I was 16. I couldn't stand our father. But I heard what he did to you, Margaret. I heard the whispers. And I hated myself for leaving you there alone. My mouth went dry. Why didn't you ever come back? Why didn't you save me? He looked down, shame filling his face. Because I was a coward. I ran as far as I could, built another life. But I never forgot. When I heard you visited this house, I panicked. I sent the letter. I thought if I scared you away, you'd leave it all buried. Rage flared inside me, not just at him, but at every adult who had known and stayed silent. My mother, her sisters who wrote those letters, and now, a brother I never knew existed. You don't get to decide what I bury, I snapped, my voice shaking with years of fury. This is my story. My pain. My truth. Tears filled his eyes. I'm sorry, Margaret. I thought I was protecting you. But I see now you don't need protection. You need to be heard. I stood taller, gripping my walking stick like a staff. You're right about one thing. I don't need your protection. I needed it when I was a child, and you weren't there. But now, I'll finish this myself. Daniel, who had been silent until then, spoke up. Maybe this house isn't meant to hold secrets anymore. Maybe it's time to burn them out. I turned to him, startled. Burn it. He nodded. It's nothing but rot and shadows. Letting it stand only keeps the memories alive. For a long moment, I stared at the peeling wallpaper, the cracked floorboards, the stains that would never wash away. He was right. This house wasn't a monument, it was a prison. I walked outside, Samuel and Daniel following. The sky was dark now, rain threatening but holding back, as though waiting for my decision. I gathered broken branches from the yard, old newspapers from inside, and piled them in the living room. My hands didn't tremble. They were steady, determined. Samuel watched, silent but pale. Are you sure about this? Yes, I said firmly. This house took enough from me. It doesn't deserve to stand. I struck a match. For a moment, the flame flickered weakly. Then it caught, devouring the paper, licking up the wood. The fire roared to life, hungry and merciless. We stood outside as the house burned. Flames climbed the walls, cracking windows, collapsing the roof. Smoke rose into the sky like a soul finally leaving its body. I felt no fear, no sorrow, only release. This is for the little girl who lived here, I whispered, and for the woman she became. When it was over, the fire department came, sirens wailing, but nothing could save the house. They asked questions, of course, but Daniel told them it had been an accident, and Samuel backed him up. I simply watched the ashes scatter in the wind. For the first time in my life, I felt light. In the weeks that followed, I spoke publicly about my past. Ruth and encouraged me to share my story at church, then at a women's shelter. At first, my voice shook. But soon, I found strength in the faces of those listening. The ones who, like me, had lived in silence. Each time I spoke, I saw them lift their heads a little higher. Evelina recorded one of my talks and posted it online. To my surprise, thousands watched. Messages poured in, people thanking me, saying my words gave them courage. I had lived nearly 8 decades in shadows. But, at last, I was living in light. As for Samuel, he came around more often, desperate to mend what had been broken. Forgiveness didn't come quickly, but I let him in. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. And Daniel, the man who once hid in that cursed house, found work at a local diner. Sometimes he stopped by with pie, and we sat on the porch, two survivors bound by fire. Now, as I sit here in my rocking chair, the sun setting beyond the hills, I know one thing for certain. Silence is the cruelest prison. But truth? Truth is the key that sets you free. My father may have broken me. My mother may have abandoned me. But I, Margaret Holloway, lived. And I will not leave this world quietly. Friends, Margaret's journey shows us that no matter how long we carry pain, it is never too late to break the silence and reclaim our strength. If this story touched your heart, share it so others can find courage too. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, truth, and redemption because silence ends here. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Thank you, and God bless you. He stepped closer. I'm your brother, Samuel.